All right, how's everyone doing? Right before lunch, last panel. So my name is Pete Rizzo, editor at Bitcoin Magazine and editor-at-large at the Kraken Cryptocurrency Exchange. So today we're going to be talking about mass payments adoption, so different than what you've heard about on stage earlier today. Introducing the panel here, so I guess when I call your name, guys, come on stage. First, we've got Will Reeves, CEO and co-founder of Fold, a Bitcoin rewards card that gives Bitcoin back on every purchase. Will? All right. Next up, we have Britt Kelly, a core member at B2C Pay Server and a self-hosted open source crypto payments platform. Britt. Next, we have Chris Hunter, co-founder and president of Galoy, a Bitcoin banking as a service solution built on Lightning. We have that? OK, there he is. Great. Get him a microphone. Last but not least, Ken Kruger, founder and CEO of Moon, a platform that enables people to pay with cryptocurrency. Oh. And do we have another chair, or I can stand? I guess I'll be the standing. Oh, I've got it. Great. Welcome. All right. Before we get started, let's just do a quick show of hands. See how you guys are using the Bitcoin network. How many people have made a payment with Bitcoin this month? You've actually sent a transaction to someone on the Bitcoin network. That you guys are eligible for this? Okay. All right, keep them up for a second. Okay, yeah, about half. Okay, how many people never spend Bitcoin and actively try not to spend Bitcoin? Okay, all right, a decent amount. I'm gonna sit down. Okay, well, let's start there. I know on the stage we had some lively conversation earlier, some bullish predictions on the Bitcoin price, people talking about $2 million Bitcoins, $4 million Bitcoins. This panel, of course, about mass payment adoption. Curious for you guys, are you guys trying to make me spend my Bitcoin? Why are you doing that? Chris, start. Oh, Chris over there, sorry.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Hunter, co-founder of Galoy. We're also the creator of the Bitcoin Beach wallet. That was our proof of concept that we created in 2020 in El Salvador, largely on the back of the fact that venture capitalists told us we were 5 years too early, so we wanted to show the world that Bitcoin could actually be used as money, which led to nation-state adoption. But to come back to your question, you know, most humans don't deal well with paradox, right? And Bitcoin is both an asset and a network, but it's also both a store of value and will quickly become the most widely used medium of exchange worldwide. And so this kind of gets to the heart of the question, where you don't want to spend your Bitcoin, but it's also going to be probably 15 years from now the most commonly used money in the world. And it's tough for people to get their head around it, but the way I explain it to my friends, who most of whom don't understand Bitcoin well, is Bitcoin is this emergent technology, right? And we're seeing the birth of this new financial system, and birth in nature is always messy and violent, right? And that's expressed in the Bitcoin price. And so the Bitcoin price will continue to go up. It will continue to then to moderate and become less volatile over time. So it's a personal question whether you want to spend it now because you have this point of view that it's going to go up, but this paradox that the price is going to go up, which is a disincentive to spend it, will become less of a tension over time as Bitcoin becomes more valuable, less volatile, and does become more widely used as money.
Britt, why am I spending Bitcoin today?
I would say not spending Bitcoin would be kind of a luxury. I think there's a lot of people out there who are doing it out of necessity. You know, if you have the ability to hold it forever, that's great. But there's definitely a lot of people who are using it because they are, you know, outside of the traditional financial system. There's people who are using it out of convenience too. We're seeing a ton of new Bitcoin apps in the app space where, you know, young people are using it because it's easy. It's on your phone. I mean, people use things out of convenience just as much as people use things out of necessity. So you can have it and hold it if you like. You can spend and replace, but either way, at some point, I would suggest at least learning how to spend it and use it.
Right. Will, do you want to take that question? Why am I spending Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin, as it relates to payments, has always been largely driven by people on the edges or the fringe. And whether that's I can't play poker because my poker tournament doesn't let me pay with USD anymore, right. I need to buy something special.
Like Drake recently, right? I think that was Drake.
That was
the
Drake,
rapper.
yes. It's largely been driven by those that need it out of necessity, and following that path and seeing how that edge has gotten larger and larger and larger over time. And in the past week, seeing it go from something that we can all point to, hey, these are fringe edge cases, to governments are shutting down people's ability to transact, to save in their own currency, and even more recently, foreign governments are able to do that to world citizens in other countries, and we're seeing that fragility more and more, and that edge is quickly becoming the center.
Ken, do you want to take that? Do you have a microphone? Okay, great.
Yeah, so my company, Moon, our product pretty much allows you to spend Bitcoin anywhere Visa's accepted, very privately. We don't request any personal information. It's the only Visa card that does not require KYC to spend your Bitcoin. So that's really what we've seen. It's very powerful for two categories of people. One are people who have opted out of the fiat system entirely. They're in the developed world, and they really appreciate that privacy-preserving nature. And then on the other hand, there are people internationally who are using Bitcoin for payments out of necessity. So they're experiencing hyperinflation. They're rapidly trying to get their assets out of their local fiat currency into Bitcoin. Once it's in Bitcoin, they then want to use it as something to live on. So that's something very, very powerful. And for us as a company, we're all about allowing people to live on Bitcoin.
Yeah, that goes to my next question, which I was going to have you guys kind of explain a little bit about. What's the business model that you're building for your project or business? How does it actually enable payments, and where do you guys come in, and how do you make money off that? Because I assume that's the opportunity you see here. Chris, on the end, do you want to hop in there and share?
Sure. So, we're a little bit different than most companies in the space. First of all, we're fully open source, which is not only in line with the spirit of what Satoshi put forward in the white paper, but we actually think that provides a strategic advantage to our company versus everybody else who's building on Lightning in a closed source fashion. But the simple version of our company is we don't want to be the bank, but we want to be the leading infrastructure provider or Bitcoin banking software provider for people to set up their banks around the world. And what it means to be a bank on open money will be very different than what we've seen in traditional fiat, where we will serve traditional financial institutions or retailers, but we also serve towns or charities or your religious organization or governments. Our proof of concept is a community bank for a town. But the simple version of what we do is if Bitcoin, the settlement layer, is layer 1 and Lightning is layer 2, that makes it effectively free and instantaneous to transact. What we're creating at Galloy is open source operating system level 3 for anybody to then set up a bank on top of that. So you could think of us as Linux for the future financial system if you think Bitcoin is going to win out as money.
Sorry, is that the business component? You're really building on that third layer there for businesses.
That's right.
Okay.
We're effectively building layer 3 operating system.
Okay. Britt, I know that you do not represent a company here. You represent an open source project. What's the opportunity that B2C Pay Server is aiming for? What kind of payments do you enable?
So I will also note that we do receive donations from a lot of different companies. So although it's an open source project, it is funded by various generous donors, which includes some companies and other projects. And there's various reasons that those entities will contribute to the open source projects, such as BTC Pay Server, that are somewhat interesting, which is important to note that you might have a company which is operating, to make a profit and, produce results for your shareholders, whatever. But you can also invest in open source projects which enable more people to enter into the Bitcoin space. And so investing in open source projects to allow people to use Bitcoin is contributing to the value of their company. And so there's also a lot of capital moving into open source projects through donations and through contributions to individual contributors, even for like Bitcoin Core and stuff. So it's not all open source volunteerism. There's definitely interest to move open source projects forward as well. And yeah, obviously BTC Pay enables any merchant or any individual to accept Bitcoin payments. So that's really the whole point of the project.
Great. Could you pass your microphone to Will and maybe? Oh, get a rush there to offer a microphone. So Will, explain your business model. How does it enable payments? What type of payments does it enable? I know you have a bit of a different take here.
Yeah, so Fold is a Bitcoin rewards company, and so we essentially incentivize people to spend through us and at our merchant partners to earn Bitcoin back as rewards.
Well, they're spending fiat in this case mostly.
They can spend both Bitcoin via Lightning, or they can spend fiat via a Visa card or their own debit and Visa card. And so it's kind of a funny thing, a business model on Bitcoin payments when, Britt just explained there's wonderful open source software that brings the cost of accepting payments to zero. You can own that yourself. And so where does business start to generate on top of such a new payment system? And so you definitely have to get creative in that world, and your business model will start to change. And so Fold has focused on the rewards element there, where we share in revenue from merchants who are looking to expand their user base, get access to the very, very quickly growing Bitcoin community and those who want to accumulate that. And so for us, that is where we are seeing the most growth in the revenue. But at the bottom line is we are seeing increasing payments via Lightning and Bitcoin, and that essentially edges out and obsoletes the traditional payments models of interchange revenue on Visa network and things like that. So it's going to be interesting going forward, and businesses like ours are going to have to be creative in how to deliver value while also making sure that we have a sustainable model underneath.
Ken, wondering if you can pick up there and talk about those challenges. You mentioned a little bit about your business model to begin. Could you drill down a little deeper? What kind of payments are you enabling?
Yeah, so for us, we're really saying you should spend your Bitcoin. You should do so in a privacy-preserving way. And we have a pretty great offer to our users, and that is spend your Bitcoin. You're effectively getting a conversion from Bitcoin to dollars for free. As long as you're spending it through us, there's no fees for it. We also don't know who you are. So you're getting a free private transaction from Bitcoin to dollars, and you're spending it. And for us, we get paid through interchange. We're taking advantage of the traditional payment system, and you're reaping the rewards because we're covering the cost of your conversion to dollars. So that's really the way it should be. You shouldn't have to pay money. Shouldn't have to pay fees to spend your own money, which is often the case if you sell Bitcoin to then go spend it, right? And if we're competing with the fiat system, really the way we look at ourselves is almost like a stopgap measure until every merchant starts accepting Bitcoin directly. We're going to have to use and leverage these traditional payments rails.
Switching the subject here, I know the panel's presented some thinking on this. Just thinking about Bitcoin payments internationally versus in the West. Ken, let's stick with you. How do you look at that? Are you looking at opportunities only in the West? Are you looking internationally? What's your take on just how payments are developing in both of these areas?
Yeah, so when we launched our product, what was really interesting was that I started getting lots of emails in Spanish. There was huge demand.
From El Salvador, maybe?
Yeah, a little El Salvador, a lot Venezuela, Argentina, a lot of the places that a lot of the other speakers have spoken about so far. And there was a huge demand where we've seen situations, specifically people who are unbanked, underbanked, they can't make international payments. So say, for example, you're in Nigeria and you want to sign up for Spotify. Wow, something that we all take for granted. You can't really do that in Africa almost anywhere. The African banks prevent you from spending internationally. There are all these kind of arbitrary limits in place. So we found a lot of folks come to us and really just try and do the things that all of us as Americans take for granted. And that's something that's very powerful. We want to continue to enable that type of functionality for folks. We even have people learning Bitcoin just to get access to making these types of payments. I think that's very powerful to kind of educate people and kind of dangle something in front of them to learn a little bit.
Well, curious if you have a different approach there. Obviously, you mentioned gift cards, rewards. Are you thinking mostly about the West? Are you thinking about international? And then how do you see the two opportunities?
Gift cards have been a very interesting tool in the growth of Bitcoin itself. It has been a intermediary from getting into Bitcoin and then having access to traditional merchants and their payment systems. And so you see massive growth from companies like what we've seen with Fold or BitRefill and Paxful, providing this immediate ability to connect people who do not have access to these services, traditional banking services, but finding access to merchants for their everyday spending needs through gift cards as a means. It's a really interesting kind of relationship that these two payment systems have found together. And so Fold has found our primary niche is growing in the US and North America now, but our gift cards are used globally for various things to give people access to services that they wouldn't have. And again, folks like Bitrefill, Paxful, and others are doing a wonderful job in increasing people's access, again, at the edges, so that they can top up their phone, buy goods and services, send money abroad, and it's something that I think we're only going to see continued adoption of. But as we start to see these payment systems start to mature, like we see with Galoy and BTC Pay Server, we're going to see that gift card as an intermediary become a temporary stopgap, and we're going to see it just go straight to the source as the payments acceptance infrastructure gets more mature.
Let's pass that over to Britt. Curious, I know you represent an open source project, maybe don't know as much about your customers or people using the software. International, Western world, how do you think about those two things?
Yeah, we are not collecting any data on the users, so it's impossible to know specifically who is, the major users of this open source project. But that's one of the beauties, is that anyone can deploy a BTC Pay server using various methods. So whether it's in the cloud or on some Raspberry Pi or an old computer, you can connect it to any kind of wallet, whether that's a hot wallet or a hardware wallet, or you want to do, PSBT transactions. There's various ways that you can accept Bitcoin using this tool, which is traditionally used by merchants. Obviously, it's a payment processor, but the idea is that you will set it up and it can create a new invoice and a new address for each payment, which is very good for people who are collecting payments potentially for various reasons that might be, potentially labeled as political or terrorism, something like that. You want to have, no address reuse, and something which, if they shut your server down, you still have the private keys. You can set up another server instantly. It's a great way to really hit the ground running if you're a small merchant or you're an individual, or even if you're a big company, such as like Namecheap. It's one of the easiest ways to accept Bitcoin as a merchant or an individual. So anyone who is willing and potentially out of necessity needing to accept Bitcoin, it's a great option to avoid centralized solutions if that's not an option or it's something that you don't want to do.
Moving over to Chris, I know you mentioned that you're a U.S. company, obviously has seen success internationally, working with the Bitcoin Beach project. How do you think about the West? How do you think about international? Are you going to be focused on international for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I mean, all of our clients are outside of the U.S. We would have loved to have started in the U.S., but the regulatory burden and the cap gains tax treatment just didn't make it favorable. To answer your question, I'd like to take a half step backwards and just paint a picture. There's, I think, three broad ways I think about answering the question. One is Bitcoin is extensible and provides all these possibilities that we don't have in the fiat system in terms of privacy, in terms of micropayments, streaming payments, and that's going to express itself in many ways. But let's put that to the side. There's two broad paths. There's basically the global south and the Middle East, where people don't have access to financial services, and Bitcoin provides amazing possibilities there, and we've shown that in El Salvador and elsewhere. But more interestingly, we have clients in highly regulated markets like the EU, and there's amazing possibilities there as well. People are like, oh, on Lightning, Bitcoin is just a little bit faster, better, cheaper Visa. And it's much more than that, because since 1971 in particular, the cost of compliance in a fiat standard is the whole reason why we have all this roll-up of banks, right? And basically just, you've got JP Morgan Chase and a few other global money center banks, because the cost of complying with FinCEN and all these other regulators is so high. You can't be just a small independent community bank. With open source money, and this is not going to be some utopian panacea, but with open source money, we're going to revert back to a place where you can have a community bank for 100 people, right? Because you can have things like proof of reserves, which means much less regulation, which means you can move to a system where you don't have to be a $100 billion corporation in order to cost effectively be your own bank. You can actually be your own bank, in a village of 3,000 people on the Pacific coast of El Salvador or in the middle of Iowa or anywhere else. And that's what's really interesting to tie it back to the West. You know, we think about just providing financial services for Bitcoin today for people who don't have it, and that's a huge use case. But even for people in America or the European Union, this is important stuff as well for a number of different reasons, which we can explore more if you want.
Yeah, Chris, I did want to stick with you. Something you just mentioned about the big companies. Obviously, we've seen big entrants in the space, right? PayPal, Venmo, people who traditionally, you know, we associate with the payments. People might use them for payments. How does what you do fit in with that? Is it changed or challenged or by this movement?
I mean, not at the risk of sounding arrogant, we don't really worry about that. I mean, we've seen on Wall Street and financial services, just think about buying a stock, right? In the 1970s, you wanted to buy a stock, you had to pick up the phone, pay a couple $100s to buy a stock, right? Then stuff like E-Trade came along 20 years ago and you could buy it online for $10. The insight is the cost of everything on Wall Street for institutional money movement basically asymptotically approached zero. As Will alluded to, we're going to say the same exact thing in payments. And you know, look at the Collison brothers who've, you know, co-founded Stripe, which is a $150 billion corporation. They're very smart guys. They basically on Twitter a couple months ago had this open conversation where they know that their existing franchise is going to go away in terms of the rent that they extract in the fiat system now. They know this free, fast thing called Lightning is going to eat their lunch. And so it's just a question of whether you're an existing actor like Visa or PayPal or new actors like we have on the stage here. You know, these services are going to be provided. The underlying cost is basically zero, and it's a question of how do you build a business model around that. So we're just focused head down on building this operating system, and we've got point of view in terms of how we make money, but we know the costs are going to approach zero, and it's a real threat to the existing actors because they either need to adopt or die.
Why don't I toss it over to Will if you want to pass him the microphone. Curious what your thoughts are on that, the incumbents that are coming in the space. How do you think about it? Is it an opportunity to work with somebody like a PayPal or Venmo? Or are you directly competing with that stuff? How do you look at it?
I mean, there's you know, the reality is, you know, Fold and other companies have to rely on a lot of traditional banking infrastructure now for on and off ramps into the system. But the reality is, the further you integrate, the more the properties that we love about Bitcoin start to fade away. Bitcoin becomes confiscatable. Bitcoin becomes censorable. Bitcoin becomes all these things that we know it is outside of these systems, but the further you integrate, it becomes more and more fragile. And so the balance that companies need to make is what trade-offs are they making and what is the end goal here? Are we going to increase adoption, to increase a wider base here that allows us to have a larger market for peer-to-peer non-custodial solutions out there? Like, is this what it is? Is it a beachhead to create the demand, then to have, you know, hopefully we can then transition to these forms of managing money that are more akin and true to Bitcoin's core properties, because if we're not able to do that and make that transition, we're stuck in the exact same system that we have. And so that's I think a balance that all Bitcoin payments companies are ultimately making, and those are happening in real time now as we make partnerships and inroads with the existing system.
Ken, how do you think about the incumbents entering the space?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the traditional institutions see the writing on the wall, right? A lot of the banks and the payments networks have dedicated teams specifically for Bitcoin and crypto, right? They're saying, hey, you know, we don't want to go the way of Yahoo when Google came along. I think a lot of these larger institutions learned that lesson. They're looking at the past and saying, we don't want to be disrupted. So they're trying to disrupt themselves. I don't know how successful they're really being, but they're trying, right? And I think as a community, it benefits us because it's massively picking up adoption. People are learning what Bitcoin is, and it's almost the gateway drug until someone comes to an event like this and really understands what it's all about. And I think it's really good for us. But like Will said, we have to be very careful if we become too reliant on these systems. You know, if 90% of people or 99% of people utilizing Bitcoin are using it through these traditional institutions, you know, you lose a lot of the benefits. So it's important that we're also building solutions that are, you know, upholding the core values of what Bitcoin is all about. And that's something that we have to walk a very fine line. And it's much, much harder, you know, for us to offer a no KYC Visa card that you can spend with Bitcoin. I mean, it took me 3 years until I got the right people on board to allow that to happen. And, you know, it's a constant fight. But I think that's something as a community, we have to put up that fight. We have to convince people. We have to win people's hearts and minds and get them on board with the vision here. So one step at a time.
Yeah, switching up, my panel on the stage yesterday was about the future of Bitcoin code. Bitcoin developers have spent years building the Lightning Network. You guys have alluded to it a few different times. Britt, I want to move it over to you. How does Lightning change what you're doing? How does it influence what you're doing? Can you speak about Lightning and how it's going to change Bitcoin as a means of payment?
I would say the biggest improvement is the just instant experience, the user experience of that instant payment. I mean, on-chain payments are cool. It you know, on your app, it looks like it goes through, but if you're not really a technical person, like you want it confirmed instant, you want to see that like fast tech, and I think that the Lightning Network really brings that to the user experience, which is incredible. In terms of merchants, obviously, you know, cash finality or Bitcoin finality in a store is obviously very important. You can't really wait for confirmations when you're making a sale in a physical store, so that's also an improvement. And just the ability for merchants to manage their own liquidity is in some ways a little bit of a hurdle or a barrier to entry, but it also allows merchants to do very cool things, such as identifying a payment between your Lightning node and, let's say, Fold's Lightning node, and being able to offer, you know, something special. So there's a lot of, you know, user experience with the speed, and also some very cool things that you can do behind the scenes that just improves the user's experience without them having any idea what's going on. They don't need to know if it's on-chain or off-chain. They just want to pay as quickly as possible.
So would you say the project is mostly focused on Lightning at this point, or are you also supporting on-chain transactions?
I would say that there is more development happening in the layer 2, but in general, one of the main focuses of the project right now is actually improving the sort of like merchant dashboard and the overview, so that individual users or merchants who are using BTC Pay Server can see, you know, statistics and accounting on how many transactions you've received and how much you have in all of your wallets, which even if you're an individual and you don't have a Bitcoin accounting software, I highly recommend checking out setting up a BTC Pay Server for yourself. It's very cool. You can label all of your transactions and do your own personal accounting, even though you're not a merchant, but you can connect several wallets. It's very, very cool to be able to get an overview of like your money management, even if you're an individual. And it's been a big focus and a big desire for a lot of merchants for the past few years, and that's one of the big focuses.
Okay. Will, curious if you could take Lightning. How is that working with your business? What are you doing with Lightning today? How does it change what you're doing in the future?
I mean, so Fold, we accept payments from people who bank with us, have checking accounts. We accept anyone's debit card, credit card, and we accept Lightning payments. And the payment that I like to see come in more than any other is a Lightning payment. I know it's there, it's settled. The fraud aspect is completely mitigated. There's zero cost to us, and just those things alone, operating a payments business is essentially zeroing out some of the major cost centers of running a payments business, which is fraud and middlemen in between charging fees. So I love a Lightning payments and our Lightning users. Now, we stopped accepting on-chain payments a while ago. Part of that is because there's actually a ton of overhead and poor UX paying for retail everyday items with on-chain. And Lightning brings a lot of those user experience upgrades like Britt was just talking about that really transform how someone can experience Bitcoin. And also at the same time offering probably the larger thing is a global payments network around this. So we are committed to developing the Lightning ecosystem, again, generating demand for it. Part of what we did early on is that we gave you more rewards when you spend with Lightning versus on-chain or even a credit card. And what that did is when the Lightning ecosystem was very small, it led a lot more demand for people to uptake new Lightning wallets to try them out, Blue Wallet and some of the early stuff. And so what we saw is that oftentimes the most important things are incentives. and how do we change user behaviors. And so I think as the ecosystem grows, we're going to see tons of new service providers operating on Lightning, which we already are. That's only accelerating faster and faster. Before it might have been a handful of companies. Next year there will be thousands, and that alone is going to drive incentives in adoption up there, which is then going to be contributing back down to the development of the ecosystem with BTC Pay and other great projects like that.
Ken, do you want to take that? How do you think about Lightning Network? What's it adding to your business?
Yeah, so we started with Lightning before on-chain. It's actually kind of ironic. We're adding on-chain this upcoming week, but we've been on Lightning since 2019. We started building. And it's been very powerful because when you think of a payment and the experience you want, it has to be fast, has to be cheap, and the other thing that we found to be very important, it has to be private, right? And as we've seen more and more chain analysis tools go out there and they're monitoring the flow of all the Bitcoin, I think it's going to be more and more important for people to use the Lightning Network to make sure that their payments remain private. You don't want all of your information out there. So that's really important. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. Ken, do you want to take that? Your take on the Lightning Network? I know you're very focused on that. Sorry, did I get you guys mixed up again, Chris?
Chris.
Yeah.
No, all good.
Switcheroo.
Yeah, maybe I'll set some historical perspective, and this is just building on everything that Ken and Will and Red just said. Lightning is absolutely critical to the future of Bitcoin, full stop. With 100% certainty and conviction. What I mean by that, at Galloway we published our thesis 2 years ago. Our whole company is completely dependent on Lightning, and what I mean by that, people will read the Satoshi white paper and it says peer-to-peer electronic cash. They say, okay, let me compare Bitcoin to something like Visa or PayPal, which feels like digital cash to me. And then they're like, oh, Bitcoin sucks because it takes 30 minutes to have finality with 3 block confirmations, and that's where they go wrong. And in our thesis, we outline you should not compare the Bitcoin base layer protocol layer 1 to PayPal. You should compare it to Fedwire, where all dollars settle, right? And Fedwire is a private closed member club that only operates a limited number of hours per week, and you have final settlement in 3 or 4 or 5 days, right? And it's not extensible in any way. And Bitcoin is the opposite. It operates 24/7, 365. If you're a human with an internet connection, you can play. You have final settlement basically after 3 block confirmations or in 30 minutes, not 3 days, right? And we built all these layers on top of Fedwire post World War II in order to enable commerce in this country, right? For people and businesses to conduct business. We have commercial banks, and then in 1956 this thing called Diners Club, and in 1958 the precursor to Visa, right? So we got Fedwire, final settlement, commercial banks, credit cards, ATM networks, peer-to-peer stuff like Venmo, PayPal 20 years ago. We're going to build the same layers on top of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin, the settlement layer, layer 1, is where final settlement happens. Layer 2, Lightning, is basically where most humans will ultimately onboard to Bitcoin. As Bitcoin becomes the most widely used money in the world over the next 10 or 15 years, the majority of humans will never touch an on-chain transaction. So Lightning almost becomes their base layer of entry point. And so Lightning is perhaps the most important thing for Bitcoin, full stop. And like I said, we're building a layer 3 on top of that already, as many other people are.
I want to leave some time for questions. Going to wrap it up here, sticking with you, Chris. We're going to talk about, kind of bring in some of the subjects and themes that people have talked about, obviously, on the stage before today. Canadian government's getting involved, the Ukraine government soliciting donations in Bitcoin. How do you guys see this development, especially as we think about this migration of payments to Lightning from the Bitcoin layer, base layer? How do we think about, or what's your take on what's going on with, obviously civilians looking to make payments, looking to express their rights and freedoms with payments? How do you think about that, and what do you see as the current state of the situation?
I'll try to keep it brief. It's pretty complicated, right? We want to operate, we will operate in a fully compliant fashion, and we're not the bank. We're a software and services provider that allows other people to set up their own bank, and those clients, if they're not compliant in their jurisdiction, we probably won't serve them. But then there's the possibility we're providing open source code. Anybody can just come see the entirety of our code, fork it if you want, use it in your own way, which raises the possibility, will somebody use our code in order to send unstoppable, uncensorable transactions on their own, even though they're not compliant. That's a possibility, right? And so it remains to be seen how the world will evolve over the next couple of years. You know, what happened with the trucker convoy in Canada is probably just the tip of the spear. What's happening with Russia and SWIFT is probably just the tip of the spear. So I don't have a crystal ball that predicts in terms of how the world will evolve, but my best guess is there's probably going to be some forcing function event, just like COVID was a forcing function event 2 years ago that really changed the way we live our lives. I think there will be something like that that happens in some reasonably short number of years from now that really pushes Bitcoin to the forefront as, you know, kind of a real rail that the majority of humans start to use. I'll leave it at that.
Britt, Canada, Ukraine, Russia, how do you think about that? How does it impact what you guys are doing?
Well, I mean, we obviously want to create tools for people who are inside the system, outside of the system, anywhere in between. And I think that being able to say that those options exist and being a part of that is definitely motivating even more people in the space lately. I think it's a great, I don't want to say initiative for people to start building on Bitcoin, but I think that there are more people who are feeling called to action and called to create on, you know, uncensorable money and money that is helping people out of when they have to use it out of necessity. And tools like BTC Pay Server are always going to be there for someone. Like Chris said, it's open source. Anyone can fork it. Anyone can use it. It's there if you need it. And in terms of, you know, countrywide conflicts, I think like some of the previous panels are speaking on this. Obviously, you know, the optimistic approach is the side-by-side systems happening. But like Chris said, you know, if there is a drastic event and the, you know, the pessimistic approach here, like we need these tools available. And so it, you know, they exist prior to that situation happening, and we need to keep building them for preparation as well.
Will, your take, payments in a time of global conflict, how do you guys think about it?
I think the events over the last couple weeks is probably as large of a kind of a mass awakening moment to the importance of the project of Bitcoin since, you know, Chancellor on the brink of bailout for the banks. And the difference is that Bitcoin wasn't really available or known at that time. Now the infrastructure is mind-bogglingly huge and developing at a fast clip, where it is essentially accessible to nearly everybody in the world now. And so when you have these mass kind of realization moments that are very clear on the value proposition and the tools at hand to solve the problem, it's going to get very interesting.
Ken, you mentioned privacy being a component of the service. How do you think about the state of global payments right now?
Yeah, so I think that there's a large movement that's forming around privacy, truth, authenticity. I think we've had a lot of that missing, and people are seeing that. And a lot of the recent global events are bringing that increasingly to the forefront. You know, I have friends of the family that are not technical at all. 2 years ago, they asked me, "What's the stupid Bitcoin thing you're doing?" And now they're coming to me, and they only use Signal. They're asking me if they should buy a privacy phone. They're saying, should they put all their money in Bitcoin? You know, so it's really interesting to see that very rapid adoption and seeing the this movement from places I didn't see coming at all. So I think it's very powerful, and offering a privacy preserving tool, I think is going to be increasingly important. Whereas right now it may seem very niche.
Still got a few minutes here. Time for questions. I think. Oh, we got hands. Okay, so I'm just gonna roam out in the audience then. Ooh, maybe introduce yourself. Ask a question.
Hey everyone, I'm Justin Rudrick, Bitcoin Vegan. Met some of y'all all before. I got a quick question. So, Britt, earlier you said that you all are open. You're open. Well, pretty much, I feel most of you are open source projects because you're on Bitcoin. And so, Britt, you said that you all accept donations from companies because these companies rely on your business to thrive so they can accept payments. So I want to ask, are all four of you or any one of your companies working with educational projects the same way the companies are working with you? Because if we don't bring users educated correctly, then they won't be able to use the open software anyway. So is that something you all are doing now or something you all are open to doing?
Thank you.
Absolutely. Obviously, BTC Pay, we're trying to push education on how to use the project, how to get new developers into the space as well. But another thing interesting to note is that one of our recent donors to the project was actually an investment firm. And part of the reason they wanted to be a donor was they wanted some research on, what's happening in Bitcoin. They're in traditional finance. They basically donated because they wanted the ability to ask questions, learn about Bitcoin, learn about open source projects, and so there are also people interested in learning about Bitcoin beyond just individuals as well, which is interesting.
All right,
Yeah.
another question over here. Oh, somebody want to add? Chris?
Sure, I'll just keep it brief. I mean, education is supremely important for us. We do it in a number of different ways. Probably the easiest example to see is, last June, President Bukele got up and said Bitcoin would become legal tender in El Salvador. My partner Nicholas and I were running around El Salvador June and July, August, talking to bank CEOs and others, and the lack of Bitcoin knowledge was astounding, which led us to create the first Global Lightning Summit since 2019, and we felt it was very important to host it in El Salvador in order to educate the local population and the business leaders. So we created Adopting Bitcoin, a Lightning Summit. We had 700 people from 30 countries, and we thought that was going to be a one and done, but it was so successful we're going to repeat that as an annual event. But we also have a weekly Twitter space that grew out of that, where we bring together people every week from around the world who are leading Bitcoin adoption in order to get the word out, help people understand what they can do with open source code, how they can deploy in their communities. That's just one of several initiatives that we have to try to educate people.
A quick question for Will. I have a Fold card. We saw a demonstration yesterday from Guy Swan buying somebody a Uber gift card using Lightning from his phone. And I thought that was a pretty powerful demonstration. Why can't, when I click on Add Funds, see an option to add Lightning to my own account? I think you guys mentioned this a year ago, and it still hasn't happened. And so why can I buy a gift card using Lightning but not add $25 to my balance, given that you just said that it's much easier for you guys to do that than to have to take them from a bank?
It's a wonderful question, and probably the biggest one that we get right now. Part of it is that we are in transition, and that question has a little bit more to do with regulatory issues and compliance under the hood than a gift card. So there's a very different regulatory regime around what's called a closed loop payment method, like a gift card at Uber, where you can only use at Uber, versus an open loop system where you can use anywhere. And this is where all the fun regulations around FinCEN and all of these things start to get real hairy. But it's not an impossibility, and is actually something that is coming soon, I'll tell you. But I will say I could probably pass that question off to Ken, who has actually cracked some of that code and maybe could enlighten you and maybe the rest of the group on that. But the quick answer is it's a regulatory issue, not technical.
Yeah, so you can do that in Moon today if you'd like to. That's been our focus for quite some time, and it's extraordinarily painful to work with some of these institutions where they're the gatekeepers, and you need the permission in order to do that and get through 17 layers of compliance departments. So I feel your pain.
All right, I think we might got time for one more question.
Hi, Nate Secor. My question is, for someone like myself that has a business, that has a website that somebody else kind of runs, what would be your advice for me? How can I accept Bitcoin? It's called a channel manager, and I just don't know. They take Visa and MasterCard and payments like that. How would do you have any advice on how I could integrate and take Bitcoin through the Lightning Network or even direct payments straight on my website, where they don't call into my business and say, oh, we want to just pay you direct, and kind of like that antiquated method?
You should use BTC Pay Server.
Short answer there.
Agreed.
You should find me after.
This is going to be the last question here, and then lunch. So,
Hi, I'm Charles from Italy. Just a quick question for everyone. If you have a meeting next week with the CEO of PaySafe, that is a global payment network, what do you suggest to him about integration with your companies?
It's a great idea.
What was the name of the company?
The company is PaySafe. The brand has been Skrill and Neteller, They were the leading payment solution in the sports betting arena and poker. It's like a kind of people.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I mean, I think integration is very important for our world and the whole world. It's very tough to make this integration for regulatory jurisdiction. There are a lot of problems. And obviously, the guy of the old system owns a lot of power. And this power comes from the community that is quite big. So in this case, I'm speaking about Paysafe, that is company listed in NASDAQ, that offer products to millions of users all around the world. So my question is, if you have a meeting next week with the CEO of this company, that same time is even CEO of an association payment of 500 companies, how do you explain the value of the business proposition to make an integration with your different companies? Thanks.
I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. And so, I mean, technological innovation is largely a given, right? And so think about 100 years ago when the automobile was introduced. If you were a horse and buggy manufacturer, you can try to delay, prevent, obfuscate, lie about the value of an automobile, right? But an automobile is a superior form of transportation to horse and buggy in many ways. And so you can either acknowledge reality or not. And the reality is this effectively nearly free instantaneous payment network called Lightning is going to take over the world. There's going to be some inflection point. And so if you've got an existing payment network that's closed in permission as opposed to this open and free network, you just have a question to ask yourself. When are you going to abandon largely your rent-seeking activities in this closed permission system and start to adopt, perhaps with a new business model, this open free system, right? It's not an easy question to ask, but that's the question to be asked. And then you've got 4 different companies providing 4 different solutions on the stage here, and there's many different ways to answer that question, but that's the ultimate question to ask.
All right, everybody, give it up for the panel here. Mass payments adoption. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tone Vase. Thanks, everybody, for being on the panel.